Morning, viewers. This is UGC CEC EduSet Network, and we are doing a series on Indian writing in English, and today is one of the last lectures, last two lectures, that is penultimate, one can say. And in the next lecture we will be summing up this series, and then maybe after a month we will start another series of the equal interest. Today the lecture is on Har Dayal, Hints for Self-Culture. This was the book that he wrote majorly, and it was a popular book in his time. He's early 20th century, late 19th century, and he made a name for himself at that time. And we thought, that viewers of the series that is called Indian Writing in English should include personalities and people like him who wrote in English, and who wrote modern ideas, who wrote about the problems that the country faced at the time, and who were in that sense quite topical in their relevance. So, our expert today is Ms. Richa Bajaj. She teaches English in Hindu College, Delhi University, and as you might have heard her earlier lectures, she is an expert on Indian writing in English, as well as theory, and this particular topic is of her interest in the sense, that there is an Indian writer and this person is using a lot of theory. I welcome Richa Bajaj. So please start your lecture.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Anand Prakash. Welcome viewers to yet another discussion on Indian English literature. And today, as has been pointed out, I am going to speak of this absolutely phenomenal figure whose name was Har Dayal, fondly known as Lala Har Dayal. Lala is of course an affectionate term, an honorific that we give to somebody who is who we look up to. Now he's a very, I don't think many people know of Har Dayal. In fact, he was the pioneer of Indian English thought, and we can say so because he influenced generations like of Khushwant Singh and other writers who were read who read Har Dayal, he was the last name in scholarship. So this is the kind of English thought that is present in India. He is in fact a kind of a pioneer of a canon of Indian English writing. And I don't think that we should miss out on his understanding and his work that he has provided to the Indian English writer who read him in order to become a successful intellectual. And his book Hints for Self-Culture is actually addressed to a fellow young intellectual, and it shows the path to young writers how they can improve themselves. When I first read this particular text, I was actually reminded of Castiglione's The Courtier, how to be an ideal courtier, provided that became a kind of a guidebook or a manual for a Renaissance writer or a Renaissance man. It said how you could improve yourself, how you could just continually keep improving yourself and become a better person. So Har Dayal keeps saying that in his book, that your growth doesn't stop at puberty or at adulthood. You will keep growing and learning till the day you die. And this is the ideal which is provided to us in his book. And he goes on to talk about how to become this comprehensive cultural cosmopolitan figure. So in his scheme of things, you will notice that rationalism plays a very important role. In fact, in his preface, he says as much that these hints of self-culture are based on the rational principle. I use the rational philosophy to explain the points. Now, what I'm trying to suggest is that here is a writer who is adhering to the secular principle and not any kind of religion or dogma or tradition. He's in fact taking the best from all the Western philosophies that he's read, and he was absolutely well read. I mean, I don't know another person in the Indian English paradigm or this framework who would be as well read as he was. Let me just take you through his biography just to tell you what kind of a person he was. He's surprisingly, he actually undertakes a bachelor's after doing a PhD. So I've absolutely not come across such a scholar. Let's go through his biography. He was also a political activist, and very passionate. Had this zest and zeal to commit his life to the cause. And he felt, he said in as many words, without mincing words, he would say that, our religion is our service to the motherland, that is to the country. And we can have only one religion. We cannot have two religions. So I don't believe in any other God. I only believe in the cause of my country. So you see, there is this sense of complete self-sacrifice for the cause of freedom struggle. And of course, Har Dayal is born and is a product of such a society. We have to remember that the period where he becomes famous is the period when this is the period which is the formative years of all the revolutionaries. It is the years when all the revolutionaries are putting up a fight against the British rule. It is that first flush of resistance against the British rule. So one has to keep that in mind while looking at Har Dayal and looking at the kind of person he is. Let's look at his kind of biography. Lala Har Dayal, as he was famously called, and I said that Lala is a kind of an affectionate term used. So he's born in 1884 in Delhi, but he travels wide and far. He's continuously traveling throughout his life and career, and he dies in Philadelphia in 1939. So that's the period. So his constructive period is the early 20th century. He was the pioneer of Indian English scholarship. He studied extensively. He attained a double master's in English literature and history. He broke records, of course, for acquiring the highest marks. Then he went on to further study Sanskrit and Buddhist philosophy and genuinely engaged with the Marxist philosophy as well. These areas appear diverse, of course, Buddhism, Sanskrit literature, Marxism, history, English, but they integrate so well in Har Dayal. These areas are diverse, but they went into the forming of the distinct personality of the writer and social thinker that Har Dayal was. And again, I'd like to quote here what Khushwant Singh had to say about Har Dayal. He said that Khushwant Singh says about Har Dayal that while I was at school, the one name that was on all lips as the paradigm of the ultimate in scholarship was that of Har Dayal. Now you can see what I was trying to say, let's take it forward to what he has been doing, what has he done. So in 1905, Har Dayal received a scholarship from the Indian government to pursue a postgraduate course in modern history at St. John's College, Oxford. It was a big thing for any Indian to get a scholarship to study at Oxford. And this was also the time when most of his friends and fellow writers were applying for this coveted Indian civil services. That was the last thing that everybody wanted to get and acquire. So Har Dayal joined the college at Oxford, but he later decided not to take the exam, and he ventured into the freedom struggle, freedom movement wholeheartedly. He gave up his scholarship, left the study in between. But what interestingly happened, while his stay at Oxford and London, was that he came in touch with these interesting figures who were all fighting for human rights. He came in association with revolutionaries such as C.F. Andrews, Bhai Parmanand, Shyamji Krishna Verma, among others. All these people were fighting for India's freedom struggle, remaining outside while they were still outside the country. And also, you see, the Western ideal of freedom and liberty, equality that, the English Western thought stood, the rational thought of the 19th century stood for, studying the works of Tom Paine and others. All these actually went into the making of this figure that we know, Har Dayal. Now, Krishna Verma Shyamji Krishna Verma was the editor of the monthly journal Indian Sociologist, and he was a prominent revolutionary at the time. Now, Har Dayal began to write columns for the Indian sociologist, and where he absolutely gave out his motto in life, that we had to chart out a plan, we had to give have these some phases in which freedom could be achieved. And he criticized, he would critique at the same time the British exploitation of India and assert the need of revolt. Now this was, he was also editing the other journals around. He was writing for other journals. He was editing Bande Matram by Madam Kama and the journal Talwar. So he would critique British exploitation of India and assert the need of revolt. He also joined the Abhinav Bharat, a revolutionary association, where he came in close contact with Vinayak Damodar Savarkar. Another influential figure in his life was that of Madam Kama, who was devoted to the cause of India's freedom. So this entire period made Har Dayal look critically at his own position and his own place. What was he doing in Oxford? He was trying to, by taking the scholarship of the British, he was actually accepting their awards and honors. And here this another set of literature that he was reading and writing was going completely against his grain. He was becoming a political revolutionary, and here he was, on the other hand, his action of being a part of the university at Oxford was entirely different. So therefore he looked self-critically at his own self, and he abandoned this scholarship. And what is more, he also abandoned the European attire. He went to wearing dhoti and kurtas. He slept on the floor and led a life of a frugal life. He would just eat the bare minimum. He started giving lectures on Indian philosophy as well. So it's a kind of, it's absolutely a vibrant life, and his interests are diverse. But yes, the center being attaining a kind of freedom for the country, and attaining this freedom. So you see, he was this life of simplicity and dedication became his kind of life that he would lead. So what happens then after this episode, when he has formed this particular revolutionary self of his? What happens? He was greatly influenced by Lala Lajpat Rai as well. So in 1907, when Lala Lajpat Rai, when he heard the news that Lala Lajpat Rai was being arrested, he decided to go back to India. And in 1904, he reached Lahore and took charge of the entire movement in place when Lala Lajpat Rai was not around. And while he was traveling, before doing that, he actually met up with other revolutionaries. He met up with G.K. Gokhale and Bal Gangadhar Tilak to discuss the forward course of action of the movement. So you see, he went whole hog into the movement, the political movement as well. Now, where is the thinker here? Is he a political activist? Is he an English thinker? He's both, actually. Because the tradition of Tagore and Gandhi, we have to remember that the early 20th century was a period where writers were not just writers, thinkers were not just thinkers, philosophers were not limited to the realm of philosophy. All these combined in the individual. I see this era of India's freedom struggle as a kind of renaissance of Indian renaissance, because here is the time where men, women come out to the field. They are political activists, they are social reformers, they work at home, they study, they are learning new ideas. No realm of activity or no realm of thought is independent and autonomous. In fact, they are all together integrated in one to become one whole. And Har Dayal is the epitome of that movement. And that's why he's writing in Indian English, of course, but the point being that he's able to integrate all these different areas, all the different disciplines. If you go through the text, when I come to Hints for Self-Culture, you will realize that when you go through the text, you will realize that he's talking about science, philosophy, psychology, economics, political science, all these spheres which we generally consider them separate or at best having some kind of relation with one another. For Har Dayal, they are essentially bound to one another. They are not, they are in fact a part of the personality of the person. And a person who wishes to be a scholar or an, an emerging scholar or an intellectual needs to, be aware of these different areas of life, because they finally affect him or her. And an understanding of these areas would further take the person, to make a better society. He has in mind Plato's Republic as well, how to have that ideal society, suggesting in the process when he's talking about self-culture, then he's suggesting that an ideal society cannot be reached, cannot be achieved if the individual is not fully formed, if the individual is not intellectually aware and has not, developed one's intellectual culture. So these are two sides which have to grow together. They have to, they rise together and they fall together in Har Dayal's scheme of things. So you see what happened then in 1911, let me take you back to the biography. So in 1907, 1908, he has reached back to Lahore, and in 1911, what happens? He moves to America and to study Buddhism at Harvard. He is invited to deliver lectures in Indian philosophy at Stanford University. But then his controversial lectures saw him lose the job. He continued spreading the radical views and made contact with Indian workers in America. This is also the time when he, when he goes into the Marxist philosophy as well. Har Dayal founded and directed the Ghadar movement in America. This is one of the lesser known facts, and he established it formally on November 1, 1913. And then he got arrested and was left out on bail, and then he left for Switzerland. So again, the political movement, the rational thought, thinking, philosophy, all these are joined. They join together in Har Dayal. They are not separate entities. And so you will find that in 1912, this is what K.R. Samras tells us about Har Dayal. He says that by 1912, Har Dayal had become a figure to be reckoned with, as well known in Washington as he had been in official circles in London, Delhi, Calcutta and Shimla. His literary output had made him one of the most avidly read young Indians of his time. Now again, the same idea being put forward there, that political life and literary life are not two separate entities in the case of Har Dayal. They in fact come together and make a coherent one unit. He returns, you see, from 1912 to 1927-28 is the period when Har Dayal is engaged in all kind of political activities. He's moving around from one place to another. He moves to France, he goes to Germany, and he sees, the period of the world wars, and he becomes, initially he's enamored by the German point of view, but then he shifts away from it and is totally disillusioned by the German way, and comes back to understanding how to understand the Indian context and who are India's friends. So, being outside the country, he's able to, and he's coming and going. And of course, there was a red alert against him, and the Britishers were always on a lookout. If Har Dayal was to be in India, then they would arrest him. So you see, that is the kind of life he's lived, continuously traveling, meeting people of different ethos, different cultures, and with a kind of, with their own philosophy and their own ideas. So, ideas filter in from these different cultures in Har Dayal. And he's trying to formulate a viewpoint, trying to formulate an ethos for the Indian society, what way should be taken so that India achieves its freedom, and who are the friends who can come together to bring this kind of freedom and equality into the country. So in 1928, we find that Har Dayal returns to academics, and he decides to pursue his PhD, a Doctor of Philosophy, on it's titled The Bodhisattva Doctrine in Buddhist Sanskrit Literature. He pursues that, and by 1932, the book, it is published in the book form from the, he did it from the London University. Quite again very diverse, because earlier he left his Oxford degree, but again after a period of a decade or so, he comes back to academics and again joins the London University. And after doing this, taking the degree of philosophy, he moves to taking a bachelor's degree in science. because he suddenly realizes that science is an important area of life and cannot be missed. He had worked on history, literature earlier, moving to Buddhist philosophy and Sanskrit. Now he's moved to the area of science, so that area should also not remain untouched. So from 1930 onwards, we see that Har Dayal sits down to write his book Hints for Self-Culture, which is the theme or the basic book that I wish to discuss with you today. So the book Hints for Self-Culture is published in 1934 and is out there and is revised later on. Now, so this is the formative period of Har Dayal. Now, I wish to quote something from, I wish to read out something from the Indian sociologist. There was an article that he wrote for the Indian sociologist where he talked about the idea of free and united India. So, I read here, the idea of a free and united India has been intellectually appreciated by a large majority of our countrymen. But the moral force which is necessary for embodying it in actual movements and institutions is wanting. What sort of men do we want for this society of political missionaries? They should love nothing more than the cause, unquote. He goes on to assert, Har Dayal says, I quote, we should not think in terms of religion. Our only religion is service of the motherland. We cannot owe allegiance to two gods at the same time. Either be a reformer or a revolutionary. You cannot fill both roles, unquote. Now, what is the difference between a reformer and a revolutionary, one might want to ask. And when he says religion, then religion means that you dedicate yourself to a cause. Then what is the idea behind a revolutionary and a reformer? Those are the two things that come to one's mind. And I'd like to take in the view of Dr. Anand Prakash here and ask him, our convener, what does he think of this the reformer and the revolutionary? What does Har Dayal, you think, means by that?
First thing is that the two words they are using are very important words and they are very difficult to define. But in the political context, one could perhaps say that if you are a reformer, then you think that the basic structures of society are correct, but some distortions have occurred, and within the same framework, you can be changing conditions in society so that they become better. If you are a revolutionary, then you think that all across society and structures, things are wrong, they are bad, and the priorities have to be entirely changed, and that the entire social structure is to be reworked. And as you rightly pointed out, he came to the conclusion in his intellectual days later that revolution was required, not merely reform. So
yeah.
This is what I feel, and this is a thing that has inspired great writers, philosophers in history in every country, that they want to restructure society rather than change it for the better.
Yes.
So that's how I think I respond to it, and this is quite relevant, as you have said, to the activities of Har Dayal in his life.
Yes.
This is what I would say.
Yeah, I agree there, because by revolution, I think what Har Dayal seems to suggest is that one has to change the basic structures of society, that the present structures cannot just, they don't need a kind of a patchwork that you correct things here and there and then continue with the system. Sadly, we have seen that the struggle for independence and the freedom struggle and our own independence has been more reformist than a sort of a revolution. Where even when the national movement and votaries such as Har Dayal believed in revolution, even then we see that much of the structure that was used, and much of the structure that was present during the time of the British have continued in the post-independence period as well. We still continue the laws, the legal framework, the police structure. We still follow the same model even till today. And
the point to be noted here is, and this is coming from your discussion, that he is emphasizing the country quite a lot, and this is very important today. That unless you change the structures here, you can't change things here. But revolution also sometimes entails, theoretically speaking, a kind of humanity that is in chains all over the world.
Yes.
So you can't change condition in your country unless there are changes happening also in other countries. So Har Dayal is very interesting in the sense that he is talking only about India, and he is thinking of India as God. The vocabulary may be somewhat controversial, but his idea is that one has to be always India centric in the conditions. So this is something that we can take inspiration from.
Yes, that's true. So he is India centric, but not entirely so. Because he talks about these 5 concentric circles that we have around that each individual has, and he talks about them, but the idea being that one should not limit. You see, his framework is very dialectical and his approach is also very dialectical. So at one point he will say that that we have to be India centric because the conditions in the country are so, and that conditions tell you that that we must focus on attaining freedom. But he would not ask the individual, or he would not ask the scholar to limit himself to the Indian scenario. He'd say you should in fact become a world citizen. He said that go out, don't limit yourself, don't don't be guided by the narrow self-interest, and that necessarily take you towards nationalism, and kind of parochialism. He says, in fact, go out, and as you understand other countries, then you will have a better view of a cosmopolitan view of the world. And he says that all human beings, all mankind is united in that sense. So he doesn't limit to, he's aware of the conditions of India and the present requirement, but at a theoretical level he is also aware that one must not be bound, one must not remain limited to one's own national identity, that we must have a kind of a cosmopolitan world identity where human beings relate with one another.
And as you suggested, when he went to America, he started talking to workers there.
Yes.
And he must be in touch with the common people also in England.
Yes.
So that, which means that he was not limited only to Indian interests per se,
yes,
but interests of the common people all over the world.
Yeah.
This is the point you are making.
Yes, that is true. That is very much there, and also in his conversations with activists around the world, who are human rights activists, also speaks volume about the same interests that he had. So as I move to another particular essay that he wrote, and here so hence for self-culture was actually part of a broader plan that Har Dayal had, and he outlined it in his essays that he wrote, and he outlined it in an essay which was titled A Sketch of a Complete Political Movement for the Emancipation of India. I'd probably look at this and explain to you the 3 phases that he talks about, but let me just talk to you about it. He talks about this educative and academic phase where the people of the country would undertake interpretation of our history, of the lives and deeds of our heroes, stimulating a healthy national pride by impressing the idea of national continuity and unity. And at the same time, it is to gain understanding of the history of the movements for liberty in other lands. This had to be complemented, according to Har Dayal, with instruction in the principles of politics and economics. So that's the first phase of achieving emancipation of India. The first phase includes, it is the educative and academic phase where you have to improve the capabilities of people, the mental faculty of people, where they interpret their own historical past and take pride in their national past, and also at the same time see how fights in other countries have taken place, and how they have fought in their lands for national freedom. So that phase, and that phase is very important for Har Dayal. The other 2 phases that he talks about is, one is destructive, where we destroy the British supremacy and cultural supremacy, and the last phase is the constructive phase, which is actual preparation for the inevitable struggle. So these are the 3 phases that he talks about. I will focus on the first phase when I come back, and focus on hints for self-culture within that framework. Thank you. Welcome back, viewers. We are discussing Lala Har Dayal's book Hints for Self-Culture and trying to place the book within the Indian English framework. And in this first half of my lecture, I discussed about the life and times of Har Dayal, giving a kind of an overview of his personality, the kind of person he was, how he was involved in the freedom movement, and how his travel, meeting with Western philosophers, thinkers, enabled him to form his intellectual self. And here, of course, I am going to discuss now the book that he has written, which serves as a kind of a manual for young intellectuals who wish to cultivate their self. And when we speak of self-culture, then what do we really mean by self-culture? What is self-culture? Does the self have a culture? Does it operate among us, the way it operates and conducts itself vis-a-vis others? Is it conscious education of oneself? What is this particular thing that we call self-culture that Har Dayal is providing us the hints for? So in the first sentence of Har Dayal's book, he illustrates his basic intent as he suggests that it is your duty to train and develop your mind and acquire knowledge, as much knowledge as you possibly can obtain. What is being said is that it is believed that a constant engagement with the emerging questions in science, history, economics and psychology can help us develop our intellectual culture. Now this is what he is saying, that you need to develop and have a kind of culture of the self. He is advocating rationalism, and he is also talking about how individuals can develop their self by constantly learning and opening their areas of research to unknown areas. So not to limit yourself. He is using constantly in the book the metaphor of a dwarf. He says that if you stop learning, if you decide that I'm not going to read anything, I have nothing to do with these areas of life, then you're actually leading a life of a dwarf, which is suggested, the metaphor, the suggestion be that you're not living a full human life. And in fact he says that you're abusing human life if you're not using this rare gift of nature, which is your mind and which is the intellect. So he's suggesting that also why do we need this kind of culture? Why should we develop ourselves? Why should we grow? Why should the intellect be constantly be provided with challenges, and why should we learn anything around us? He's suggesting that one, of course, that's nature's gift and nature's rare gift, that is your mind, and so you must use knowledge and attain as much knowledge as you can in life, because that is the best kind of joy that you can achieve. Not the kind of petty pleasures that exist in life where thrill is very important, or the sensuousness is important, or limited to a kind of sensation. So he says that don't limit your joy, don't understand happiness as pleasure that you receive from such trivial things. He says real joy in life comes with seeing yourself develop and seeing yourself grow. That is one idea. The second idea, he says, why you need to grow intellectually is because it is your duty, he says, and I will quote from here, from the preface that he has written, and he says in the preface that man's personality needs growth and development in its 4 different aspects: intellectual, physical, aesthetic and ethical. They are the 4 facets of a complete life. He emphasizes, what does Har Dayal say here, and this is important, this is what I wish to talk to you about. He says that you stand between the past and the future. The world is yours to enjoy, to organize and to reconstruct. But he cautions the reader against turning self-indulgent. He says, as our revered philosopher poet Lucretius has taught us, life is a racial heritage that you receive for use and development and not as a personal possession. Interesting. 2 things very interesting here. One, that you stand between the past and the present, which means, between the past and the future, which means that you have a sense of responsibility. The idea is that there is a sense of responsibility that an individual has, and and the person should fulfill that responsibility by intellectually developing himself or herself, and by that logic contributing to society positively and constructively. That is the important point here. The second important point that he is raising here is of personal possession. What does he say? He says that we seem to think that our life is our own, that our life is a personal possession. We seem to think that this is our possession, and therefore we can use and use it as we like. He's suggesting, he's quoting Lucretius for it, and suggesting that your life is actually not your private possession. It is not your private property as you might think. You have a role and a duty to play, and you are that important link between the past and the future. And therefore you must see to it that you contribute to society in positive ways, to contribute to make society better. And bettering society can only happen if the individual betters oneself. So when he talks about the growth of an era, or an era's to see that an era is an ideal society can only happen when the individuals of that society are well cultivated. And therefore this is very important for Har Dayal as a kind of a framework for his his political exercise also, because he believes that unless the people of India are taken towards the principle of rationality, unless they think, analyze and interpret history, science and other disciplines, they cannot build a society based on those principles. So individuals need to be aware of all these areas, and need to at the same time cultivate themselves so that they can bring about or cultivate, so to speak, a better society for their own countrymen. And these are the important points that that's the reason why he talks about this kind of a exercise that he has undertaken, this hints for self-culture. And he says again in the preface that these short hints on self-culture are addressed to you in the hope that you will try to make the best use of your life according to the philosophy of rationalism. So it's again, one is reminded when one thinks of this idea of conduct of life or self-culture, one is reminded of the entire framework that exists in English writing, or even American literature. We know of Ralph Waldo Emerson's contribution in this field when he wrote out these lectures on human cultures, and on his famous book The Conduct of Life is based is a collection of 9 essays on wealth, on power, on fate, on beauty, on illusion, on life, aspects of life. So this kind of understanding of life is very important for to build up an entire crop of writers that who would read and who would try to inculcate these values. And again, when we think of, so Emerson in the American tradition or American literary tradition is one, Thoreau is another, whose Walden again is about the art of life, and how one has to. So these are transcendentalists, of course, but again they build a kind of a canon for the writers to follow and to take from, to take home those ideas that are provided by these two writers. In English, you have writers like Matthew Arnold who have spoken of culture and the importance of culture in life. And and one is, again, if we go back to the Renaissance and beyond, then one is reminded of Bacon, because that's the tradition that is that Har Dayal is carrying and is also trying to portray through his work. He's trying to build that kind of a literary scholar or an intellectual scholar who will take the task further in the field of ideas, suggesting that culture and ideas are very important in human life. So these are the 2 points that are important here. Now, as I move to this, I'd like to talk about what Har Dayal talks about the mind. He says that don't starve the mind. He says devote a certain portion of your time daily to study and experiment. And you feed the body several times a day. Don't starve the mind, he says. So you see, again, the idea being that that the mind also needs food, like the body, and that one must not starve the mind. And so therefore you see there is this kind of idea being portrayed by Har Dayal that the mind needs food, as much food as the body needs, and so one must not starve the mind for it. And then he goes on to say, talk about knowledge and knowing, and in one case he says that know exactly what you know, as you know how much you know, as you have at the bank, or as a housewife knows what she has in the pantry. The suggestion is that you must be absolutely aware of the kind of knowledge that you hold, and you must make summaries and notes of it so that this kind of knowledge is preserved by you. Now this is, so in this he goes on to talk in this book about how best to retain knowledge and how to devote time to knowledge, but at the same time he talks about two important obstacles that come in the way of self-culture, and what are those two obstacles, and I'd like to read from them when he says, many men and women are so money-minded that they do not undertake any serious work that does not pay. What he is trying to suggest here is that people often, the one very big obstacle that comes in intellectual culture or in developing one's culture is that people try to associate knowledge with a money making enterprise, that we try to see that anything that does not pay is useless. So that's the kind of obstacle he's talking about. That's the first obstacle he's talking about. He says that they value intellect only as the key to material prosperity. So if intellect does not bring you material prosperity, then it is a complete waste of time, and therefore that is a very big obstacle. He says in fact that you are abusing and misusing this rare gift of nature. Intellect should be employed chiefly as an instrument of growth and social service, and should not be bound by these material constraints. It must not be a tool for exploiting fellow citizens. So what is the idea? The idea is that money, the money enterprise or material prosperity leads you to betterment, but also to a kind of competition with other human beings, and to an extent that this kind of competition and this kind of narrow self-centered kind of enterprise takes you towards exploitation of fellow human beings, because then your object is to make money and not to gain knowledge. So that is a very big impediment that comes in the way of self-culture and of attaining knowledge. And he goes on to say that nature has given you a brain to know, to think, to understand, to reflect, to discover, to invent, and to feel the deep joy that comes to all who fulfill nature's great law. No words can describe the happiness and beatitude that pursuit of knowledge confers on its votaries. So it is the pursuit of knowledge that one must undertake, and not the pursuit of the money bags. That's the basic idea he's trying to talk about when he talks about the first obstacle. What is the second obstacle that comes in the way of evolving oneself and one's mental culture? The second important obstacle that he talks about is adhering to false theories and dogma. As he says that certain false theories and dogma have diverted millions of men and women from the pursuit of intellectual culture, that they have been drifted away, they have been taken away from that path. And what does he say? Some religious teachers have taught that man is made up of a body and a soul. So that dichotomy always exists of a body and a soul. He says, but they have been silent about the intellect, strangely so. Their followers try to feed the body on earth and to save the soul from perdition after death. But they neglect the claims of the mind. Why do they leave the mind? He says that religious preachers tell you of the body that must be fed in whatever way, the soul which you must save from perdition. But he says that the mind is an untouched area. The mind has its own life. The mind needs its own food as well. Again, the same idea being suggested here. They neglect the claims of the mind. Bread for the body and virtue for the soul, these are regarded as the indispensable requisites of human welfare. Nothing is said about knowledge and education. So this is the idea, and when he's talking about this, then he's actually using the ideas. He's talking about the figures of Jesus Christ and Buddha, both to suggest that they both talk about sinners and of healings, the sick, etc., all those things, but the focus is somewhat missing on the quality of the mind and its importance in all the religious figures. So that's the kind of idea he's trying to suggest. He says that Gautam Buddha also laid stress on the importance to history, science, also did not attach great importance to history, science, art and literature, etc. So this is the basic idea. These are the two basic obstacles that he talks about when one is dealing with mental culture, and that one should remain steer clear of such things. When we move to this idea, then we have to also remember what he says about dogma, and interestingly what Har Dayal says about dogma, I'd like to read from the book, and he says, I must reject the traditional method of moral culture which consists in administering to you a daily dose of a mixture of one dogma and one biography. I admit that biography is indispensable for ethical training, but I regard all dogma, theological or rationalist, as irrelevant in this connection. I propose the following course of preparation. He says, character is developed in a social milieu. You must be in living contact with other men and women if you wish to learn virtue. You must belong to a society. So the idea, what he's trying to suggest here, that when we adhere to dogma or tradition, then we lose out on the real material life that is lived by people, and that you grow best, you understand ethics, you understand virtue best when you come in contact with men and women around you who face similar circumstance, who deal with situations like you. So there is this kind of an understanding that he's trying to provide on ethics as well. So you see, I'd like to talk about aesthetic culture that Har Dayal actually talks about. And what does he say about aesthetic culture? He says, if you are virtuous and earnest, your epoch will produce great art. If you are mean and vulgar, art will also be mean and vulgar. Art is your own social image. There are 4 varieties and types of art that correspond to 4 different social and ethical atmospheres or environments. These are sublime art, sympathetic art, sensational art, and sensual art. So according to Har Dayal, the first is awe-inspiring and earnest and therefore the best. The second is pleasure-oriented and is aimed at refinement. The third is violent and passionate, that constitutes thrill and excitement, while the last is the worst of them all because, he says, it degrades and brutalizes the soul. It is a product of a corrupt and decadent civilization. Now those are the points. So what he's trying to talk about an aesthetic culture. So in the book you will find that he talks about the intellectual culture, he talks about also the aesthetic culture, he talks about ethical culture. These are different areas that he's trying to talk about and incorporate and integrate in his discussion. And all of them are interrelated. Of course, they have their own specifics that he talks about. So when referring to art, he actually says that art, is defined by society itself. So if a society is mean and vulgar, then the art of that, of that society is bound to reflect that. And suggesting, that the sublime art is one which is the best of all, and the sensual art being the one that is the worst of all, where there is, which reflects a decadent civilization. Now, you see when he's trying to make these categories, then he's trying to, why he's making these categories is to try and understand, he's analytical in approach. He's trying to understand the various facts that or various areas of life that we generally take in one go, that we generally don't give so much of importance to. So by making divisions and categories, he's able to talk about things in depth, in detail. But would it also suggest then that Har Dayal is rather cocksure? That is the kind of question that sometimes one feels that he's perhaps very sure of the conclusions that he has reached, or are these just hypotheses? So that's also one area that one has to look for and one has to understand. And in this regard, I'd like to take the opinion of Dr. Anand Prakash for this particular case. What does he think of this?
Once again, a very relevant question to be raised, because this person knows a great deal. As you have suggested, he read a lot, he thought a lot, he went into different areas of life, and therefore he has opinion on each. And since he is very bright, very intelligent, he is an excellent thinker and articulator, so he has opinions and views on everything. But the point that you have raised is whether he is cocksure or sure or just clear. I believe that he is struggling to find out these answers in his preparation to write. So when he writes, then he is clear, but he has gone through the process of what we call dialectical thinking. He is basically raising issues, and he is asking people to think over these things. And since he is emphasizing intellect, therefore intellect doesn't take any dictum and any kind of dictate from others. Intellect always works to find the answers to challenges that are there. And for that reason, I believe he is sure, of course, he is clear, yes, but he is not cocksure. And that is also, in your analysis of his writing, that he reads, he thinks about new things. For instance, he cannot say anything about science unless he has read it. So even after he has done, a PhD and all earlier on other areas, he would like to become a graduate in science, which means that he wants to actually seriously pursue knowledge, so that when he has a hang of it, then only he can say something about it.
Yeah.
So I believe he has a lot to tell us, and he has a lot to inspire us for.
Yeah.
He wants us to think independently, and anybody who thinks independently cannot be sure for a long time. Things keep changing, new disciplines emerge. So he will then rush to those new disciplines, and he would like to understand them. So I have all admiration for what he does and the way you have presented.
Yes, that's true. So there is definitely, I think, the idea being that he is very clear of what he's done. He's gone through the grind, he's gone through the process of seeing which one is the better option of the two, but finally he has reached a certain kind of conclusion which he shares with the reader. And on this I'd like you to look at his approach on language and culture and nationalism, also what he has to say. So he says that if you are English and learn both French and German, your mind is immersed in an English-French-German cleansing bath. Interestingly, he calls it a cleansing bath. You are healed still more of the leprosy of nationalism. So nationalism is for him a kind of a leprosy. He says that, if you widen your area of understanding and include more languages, become a polyglot, then you will actually become aware of the cultures. What he says further is that learning foreign languages can sharpen your intellect, and your stay at home mind is rudely awakened to a sense of world culture. So on the one hand, you have always had nationalism takes you more towards the stay at home mind, that your mind stays at home and you think of nothing else. But then when you come in contact with other intellectual cultures through different languages, then your mind is rudely awakened to a sense of world culture, that there is something beyond you, that not everyone outside your nation is bad. You become really conscious of the existence of other nations. Your mind is no longer confined in the comfortable prison of your national language and life. A new world of thought, custom, poetry and history is revealed to you. You cease to be a narrow-minded, half-educated nationalist. You are on your way to becoming a cultured cosmopolitan. So this is the idea of a well educated or a cultured person. A cultured person for Har Dayal is not limited to any particular religion or any particular ideas of nationalism, dogma, tradition. He is somebody who is able to rationally critically look at one's own conditions, at one's own life, but at the same time accept and understand areas, languages that lie outside one's own domain, in order to always, and this kind of acceptance also brings in a sense of resilience. it also brings in some kind of this kind of openness to new ideas and new cultures, and this readiness to experiment, this readiness to invent. He says also that our mind is very creative, and so we are always creatively engaging with different cultures, languages, people, areas of life, different disciplines. When he's talking about these different disciplines, then he actually mentions that how economics is very important in our life. He says that economics is, unless you have an understanding of economics, you cannot understand politics or sociology. He says it's like to understand physics, you have to have an understanding of mathematics. In a similar way, economics is a basic science that you must understand. So suggesting that all these areas are interdependent and integral. That is the basic idea, and therefore he ventures into and he goes into different areas. He suggests, and he suggests the young intellectual, the reader, to go into all these areas and to not limit oneself to one discipline, one area, because that is what self-culture is. Self-culture is to be able to understand the different areas of life. This for him is very important. So when we are discussing Har Dayal, then I suggest that we look at him as an internationalist, as a cosmopolitan figure, a political activist who was working wholeheartedly in the pre-independence period, a philosopher, and also a humanist, very importantly a humanist. He's to look at him as a scholar of literature and culture, and finally to look at him in the tradition of as a pioneer of Indian English critical thought. He is the maker of that canon of Indian English writing that will provide a generation of writers who would be fed on his kind of works. So he becomes this kind of an important figure in our context when we are discussing Indian English. With that, I'd like to wind up today's lecture. Hope you found it useful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ms. Richa Bajaj, for this wonderful lecture on Lala Har Dayal, as he is fondly called. And Har Dayal was known and rightly appreciated here as a person who focuses upon things like activism. Life should not be merely theoretical. The importance of mind, which is something new. I had not heard it so very focused in other writers. People talk about the soul, they talk about the food, the body, but they generally don't talk about the intellect. The third important thing that you emphasize in this case is the value of art and aesthetics. Very few of us, in fact, outside literature, those who are actively involved in literature, would talk about art and literature, as if this is an area which is exclusively meant for writers and expert readers. But that's not the case. This is the requirement of all. Then aesthetic culture, language, and nationalism. So imagine that one has to be critical of nationalism even as one is active at the level of the country. So this is the kind of open-endedness that he shows. He wants to take in more, and he wants to remain independent, emphasize independence. So viewers, all these qualities that were there in the early 20th century in India have to be inculcated by us, so that we become a country of what is called here cultured individuals. So I hope you have enjoyed this lecture, and thank you, Ms. Richa Bajaj, for this wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
And well, that's how we should be benefited. Thanks.